For years, mountain monsters felt like controlled chaos, folklore, fear, and brotherhood wrapped in Appalachian darkness. Viewers laughed, jumped, and followed the Ames team deep into places most people would never dare to step. But behind the shouting and the humor, something far heavier was happening. One man on that team saw it before anyone else. Joe Huckleberry Lott wasn't just muscle or comic relief. He was the protector, the one who noticed when the woods went quiet for the wrong reasons, and according to Huckleberry, there was a season of mountain monsters so disturbing it was never allowed to air. Not delayed, not re-edited, buried, footage taken, contracts rewritten, silence enforced. What they encountered deep in the West Virginia wilderness wasn't entertainment anymore, and the moment it appeared on camera, everything changed. Subscribe now, because what Huckleberry eventually revealed suggests the real monster wasn't what they were hunting. It was the truth the network didn't want anyone to see. To most viewers of mountain monsters, Joe Huckleberry Lott was the steady presence in the chaos. While the rest of the Ames team shouted, joked, and charged headfirst into the woods, Huckleberry stayed grounded. He spoke less, he moved deliberately, and when things started to feel out of control, eyes always drifted toward him. Not because he was the loudest, but because he was the one people trusted when fear stopped being fun. Off camera, that role went even deeper. Joe Huckleberry Lott wasn't just the team's muscle or security, he was its stabilizer. Crew members have described him as the person who checked everyone's mental state after long nights, the one who stepped in when tempers flared or panic set in. When a hunt went sideways, it was Huckleberry who made the call on whether they pushed forward or pulled back. That authority didn't come from the show. It came from years of shared experience and trust. As mountain monsters grew in popularity, that responsibility only increased. The stakes rose, locations became more remote, shoots lasted longer, and the line between performance and genuine danger blurred. While viewers saw the same familiar format, those on set noticed changes in Huckleberry long before the audience did. He grew quieter between takes. He stopped joking back. Sometimes he'd wander off alone after filming, standing at the edge of the tree line as if listening for something no one else could hear. What unsettled the crew most wasn't fear, it was recognition. Huckleberry didn't act like a man imagining threats. He acted like someone who had seen patterns repeat. When others laughed things off, he didn't. When producers encouraged bigger reactions, he resisted. On one occasion, after a teammate joked about provoking whatever they were hunting, Huckleberry cut him off sharply. He warned that you don't challenge something unless you're ready for it to respond. The mood shifted instantly. That wasn't a line, it was conviction. By the mid-2010s, Huckleberry had become the emotional center of the team, and also the first to sense that the hunts were no longer just stories. Something had changed in the woods, and whatever it was, he felt it before anyone else realized the show was heading toward a breaking point. By the time Mountain Monsters reached its later seasons, something subtle but important had shifted. On the surface, the format was the same: folklore, tracking, night hunts, adrenaline, laughter. But for those paying close attention, the tone had darkened. The humor didn't land the same way. Reactions felt less exaggerated. Fear stopped feeling performative and started looking real. Crew members later admitted that the woods themselves felt different. Locations that once carried an adventurous edge now came with a heaviness that lingered even during daylight. Sounds didn't behave normally. Nights felt longer. Equipment failures became more frequent, not catastrophic, but persistent enough to raise concern. Batteries drained faster than expected. Audio picked up interference where none should exist. These weren't moments played up for drama. Many never made it to air. Joe Huckleberry Lott noticed the change immediately. He began urging the team to slow down, to stop shouting blindly into the forest, to treat certain areas with caution. What unsettled others wasn't that he was scared. It was that he seemed focused, as if he recognized something familiar in the way events were unfolding. He spoke less during filming and more during quiet moments, warning that provoking the unknown wasn't entertainment once it started reacting. There were moments when jokes died mid-sentence, times when someone would laugh only to realize no one else was smiling. On more than one occasion, filming stopped not because of weather or technical issues, but because the mood simply collapsed. The woods went quiet in a way that felt intentional. That kind of silence doesn't translate well to television, so it was usually cut, but those who were there remembered it. Fans began noticing the shift too. Online discussions pointed out that the team seemed more tense, less carefree. Huckleberry, once the reassuring presence, looked burdened. His eyes scanned tree lines instead of cameras. He flinched at sounds he would have ignored years earlier. Viewers chalked it up to age or exhaustion. They didn't know the crew was already discussing whether certain hunts should continue at all. Behind the scenes, there were quiet disagreements. tense. Some wanted to push harder, escalate, deliver bigger moments. Others worried they were crossing from investigation into something reckless. Huckleberry was firmly in the latter camp. He believed the woods were no longer reacting to noise or movement, they were reacting to intent. By the time production began planning what would become the unaired season, the question wasn't how to make the show bigger. It was whether the show was still in control of what it was chasing. And for the first time, that answer didn't feel like yes. The investigation that would eventually vanish from public record didn't begin with a title, a creature name, or even a clear destination. Internally, production notes for Mountain Monsters referred to it only as a numbered site, a remote stretch of Appalachian forest in southern West Virginia, far from towns, paved roads, or reliable communication. That alone was unusual. Most hunts were anchored in local legends with names people recognized. This one came with warnings instead of stories. From the start, locals were reluctant to speak on camera. A few would talk off the record, lowering their voices, refusing to give exact location. They mentioned lights drifting along ridgelines, animals found in places that didn't make sense, and a feeling that certain areas of the woods didn't want people lingering after dark. None of it fit clean folklore. It sounded more like avoidance than myth-making. The Ames team arrived expecting another difficult shoot. What they didn't expect was how quickly things felt wrong. Weather forecasts stopped matching reality. Clear nights turned into sudden fog. Winds shifted direction without warning. Electronics behaved inconsistently. Equipment that had worked for years began malfunctioning within hours of setup. These weren't dramatic failures, just enough disruption to make seasoned crew members uneasy. Joe Huckleberry Lot reacted differently than the rest. He didn't joke about it. He didn't brush it off. He started setting stricter boundaries, positioning cameras carefully, insisting on quieter movement through certain areas. When asked why, he gave the same answer repeatedly. Something about this place didn't feel random. By the first night, the mood had shifted completely. The forest felt compressed, as if sound couldn't travel the way it should. Small noises echoed too clearly. Larger sounds felt muffled. Jeff's thermal equipment picked up inconsistent heat signatures that appeared, moved unnaturally fast, then vanished before anyone could get eyes on them. Each time the team moved to investigate, the area went dead. Physical signs followed. Deep markings appeared on gear left unattended overnight. Not scratches from animals, straight, deliberate impressions that didn't match claws or tools. No one could explain how they'd been made without waking half the camp. Huckleberry stopped sleeping altogether, choosing instead to pace the perimeter until sunrise, watching the tree line as if expecting it to change shape. By the end of the first week, they had more footage than expected, and far less certainty. Whatever they were tracking wasn't behaving like an animal reacting to bait or noise. It was avoiding patterns, studying movement, adjusting. The realization settled quietly among the crew. This wasn't a hunt unfolding, it was an encounter waiting to happen. By the second week, the investigation no longer followed any familiar rhythm. Night hunts stretched longer. Movement was slower, quieter. The Ames team spoke in short sentences, conserving energy and attention. What unsettled everyone was not what they were seeing. It was what the equipment was reacting to before their eyes could catch up. On multiple nights, thermal cameras registered large heat signatures that appeared abruptly at the edge of frame, moved against the slope in ways that defied natural gait, then vanished as soon as someone tried to reposition. For Joe Huckleberry Lot, this was the breaking point between curiosity and caution. He began insisting that every camera stay rolling, even during downtime. He double-checked battery packs, repositioned audio recorders, and warned the crew not to wander off alone. This wasn't fear-driven panic. It was preparation. He behaved like someone who believed the encounter was inevitable and imminent. One night, while reviewing footage in the field tent, the team noticed something subtle but alarming. In several clips, background distortion appeared between trees, not as a clear figure but as a warping of space, like heat haze where no heat source existed. Frame-by-frame playback made it worse. The distortion moved independently of wind. It paused, it adjusted, and in one clip, it appeared to react when a camera operator shifted position, bending slightly as if tracking the lens. No one spoke for several seconds after that playback. There was no excitement, no celebration, just silence. One crew member later said that moment felt like crossing a line, the instant they realized they weren't documenting folklore anymore. They were documenting presence. Over the next 2 nights, activity intensified. Heavy movement circled the camp after midnight, slow and deliberate. Audio picked up low-frequency sounds that didn't register as animal calls. They weren't loud. They were close. Traps were triggered without activating sensors. Bait disappeared without disturbance to surrounding ground. And every time the team tried to recreate conditions for better footage, the activity stopped completely. The cameras kept rolling though, and they caught things no one noticed in real time. Shadows that moved without a source, brief frame drops accompanied by audio distortion, and moments where the forest itself seemed to swallow light. Huckleberry stopped allowing jokes on Mike. He warned that whatever they were dealing with didn't respond to noise, it responded to attention. By the end of that stretch, no one wanted to review footage alone, and the unspoken understanding among the crew was clear. Whatever had been watching them now knew it was being watched back. The final hunt didn't begin with urgency, it began with restraint. By that point, everyone understood that rushing only seemed to make things worse. The plan was simple: split into pairs, cover more ground quietly, and let the equipment do the work. Mountain monsters had used this method dozens of times before, but this night felt different the moment they stepped away from camp. Joe Huckleberry Lot paired off and moved upslope with a handheld camera and audio recorder. The forest was unnaturally still. No insects, no wind. Even their footsteps sounded muted, like the ground was absorbing noise instead of reflecting it. Minutes passed without incident. Then the radios began to crackle. At first, it was just interference, a low hiss. Then a voice cut through. Huckleberries. One word. Movement. What followed wasn't static in the usual sense. It was uneven, pulsing, as if something was breathing directly into the microphone. The sound lasted far too long to be interference. The rest of the team moved toward the signal immediately, calling out with no response. When they reached Huckleberry's location, they found him standing perfectly still, camera raised but unmoving, staring uphill between two trees. The camera was still recording. What it captured wouldn't fully register until later. A faint vertical shape stood just beyond the tree line, tall, indistinct, its outline shimmering as though the air around it was bending. It didn't advance. It didn't flee. It tilted slightly, the way a person might study something unfamiliar. Huckleberry whispered, almost involuntarily, "It's looking at us." Then it vanished. Not by running or retreating, it simply ceased to be there. In that instant, every device shut down. Cameras, audio, thermal, radios, total blackout. When power returned, the time codes had jumped forward 9 minutes. No one could account for what happened during that gap. No one remembered moving. No one remembered speaking. Back at camp, the confusion turned to unease. Several traps had been tripped without triggering sensors. Bait was gone, dragged away without tracks. Buck was shaking uncontrollably, repeating the same sentence under his breath. It was behind us. The footage was reviewed once in silence, then again, more carefully. No celebration followed, no relief. Huckleberry didn't look relieved either. He looked shaken, not excited, not triumphant. Afraid. Later, he would say the thing that haunted him most wasn't how it moved, it was that it seemed to decide. The morning after the final hunt felt wrong in a way no one could name. There was no adrenaline hangover, no relief, no joking about what they'd captured. The footage sat untouched for hours. When it was finally reviewed in the field tent, the mood turned heavy. No one argued about what they were seeing. They argued about what it meant. This wasn't something that could be cut into a dramatic episode and moved past next week. Within a day, production was halted. Not paused, halted. Calls were made that the Ames team wasn't included in. Then, unfamiliar men arrived at the site, not regular producers or editors, but outsiders carrying clipboards and sealed cases. They identified themselves vaguely and asked for everything: cameras, drives, batteries, backups, all of it. Joe Huckleberry Lot refused at first. One camera in particular. He said it wasn't ready to be seen, that it needed contact. The response was immediate and cold: hand it over or risk removal from the show entirely. The decision was made for him. The camera was taken from his bunk while he was away. What followed felt less like television and more like containment. Every storage device was logged, sealed, and packed without explanation. No one said where it was going. No one said when it would return. By that evening, the team was instructed to suspend all filming pending review. Within days, updated non-disclosure agreements arrived, far stricter than anything they'd signed before. For the first time in its history, Mountain Monsters didn't just stop production. It vanished from the schedule. Calls went unanswered. Paychecks stalled. And slowly, the realization set in. This wasn't about editing choices or network tone. Whatever was on those tapes had crossed a line. Huckleberry understood it before anyone else said it out loud. The show wasn't being delayed. It was being erased. Once the footage was taken, the strangest part wasn't what happened next. It was what didn't happen. There was no follow-up meeting, no explanation from the network, no reassurance that production would resume. Mountain Monsters simply went quiet. Calls from the Ames team went unanswered. Emails disappeared into silence. The momentum that had carried the show for years stopped overnight. Within weeks, the strain began to fracture the crew. The brotherhood that had survived years of long nights and dangerous hunts started to thin under pressure. Some members withdrew completely, avoiding contact and refusing to talk about the trip. Others tried to move on, hoping the silence meant the footage would eventually resurface. But Joe Huckleberry Lott couldn't let it go. He believed what they encountered didn't stay in the woods. He began connecting dots. Reports from locals near the filming area describing similar distortions, odd equipment failures, and sudden stillness in the forest. The stories echoed what the team had experienced almost word for word. To Huckleberry, it felt like confirmation. Whatever they had filmed wasn't bound to one place. Legal pressure followed, quietly at first, then directly. New warnings made it clear that any mention of the unaired season, the location, or the footage would trigger immediate action. Silence wasn't suggested. It was enforced. Faced with real consequences, most of the crew chose to walk away. That decision broke something. The show wasn't just canceled. The shared purpose that had defined the Ames team dissolved with it. To the public, the disappearance of mountain monsters looked routine. To those who lived it, it felt deliberate. Huckleberry later said the hardest part wasn't losing the show. It was realizing that the evidence they fought to capture, proof that they weren't just chasing legends, had been taken out of their hands. And once that happened, the hunt wasn't theirs anymore. For years after Mountain Monsters vanished, Joe Huckleberry Lott kept his distance. He still appeared at conventions, still smiled for photos, but anyone who asked about the missing season was met with a polite deflection. To the public, it looked like loyalty to contracts or respect for the network. To those who knew him, it felt more like caution. That silence finally cracked years later, and not in a way anyone expected. Huckleberry agreed to appear on a small paranormal podcast with a limited audience. There was no hype, no marketing push, no warning that anything significant would be said. At first, the conversation stayed safe. Memories, laughs, old hunts. Then the hosts asked about the season that never aired. Huckleberry didn't deny it. He paused. His voice dropped. He confirmed that an entire investigation existed that viewers had never seen. He didn't name the location or describe the footage directly, but his language changed. He said what they captured wasn't something you edit around. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was wrong. When one host laughed nervously, Huckleberry stopped him cold. He said the thing they encountered didn't behave like an animal reacting to bait or noise. It reacted to intention. It moved with awareness, and it knew they were there before they knew it was watching. That wasn't fear speaking. It was certainty. Within hours, clips from the interview spread online. Fans dissected every word. But less than 2 days later, the entire episode disappeared. Not just one upload, every version, across every platform. The hosts later claimed they'd received legal notices demanding immediate removal. Huckleberry never commented on the takedown. He never returned for a follow-up. After that, his online presence went dark. Social media pages stopped updating. Messages from fans went unanswered. Those close to him said he became more guarded, more withdrawn. He still believed the footage mattered, but he also believed there were consequences for pushing too hard. For many fans, that brief interview changed everything. It confirmed what rumors had hinted at for years. The lost season wasn't shelved for creative reasons. It was buried, and the fact that even a careful, measured admission triggered immediate silence suggested something far more serious than a canceled TV show. Huckleberry hadn't broken his silence to tell a story. He'd broken it to issue a warning. In the years since that brief confession, Joe Huckleberry Lott has avoided the subject almost entirely. When asked about the missing season of Mountain Monsters, he redirects, smiles politely, and changes the topic. Those closest to him say it isn't fear of contracts anymore, it's acceptance. Whatever happened in those woods, he believes it can't be undone by exposure. Occasionally, fragments resurface. A grainy clip, a whispered line, each vanishes as quickly as it appears. Fans argue over authenticity, but the pattern never changes. Appearance, removal, silence. Huckleberry has acknowledged none of it. The only statement he's repeated, quietly and without drama, is that some things aren't meant to be chased once they've been seen. The show didn't end with answers. It ended with a boundary. According to Huckleberry, the real danger wasn't the figure in the trees. It was what followed when the evidence was taken away and everyone was told to forget. Mountain Monsters didn't conclude with closure. It concluded with a warning. If the truth disappears that easily, maybe it was never meant to be entertainment at all. Something unprecedented just happened. Minutes ago, the remaining crew members of Mountain Monsters released a joint statement about an incident that's haunted them since 2019, an encounter so disturbing that it caused production to shut down for 8 months and left the team questioning whether they should continue hunting at all. For years, fans noticed something changed after Season 7. The energy was different. The crew seemed more cautious, more serious, less willing to venture into certain areas. Team members who used to charge fearlessly into the woods now hesitated at tree lines, and one location, a place they simply call the Hollow, was permanently marked as off-limits, with no explanation ever given, until now. The statement was posted simultaneously across all crew members' personal social media accounts, not the official show accounts, but their personal pages, suggesting this wasn't sanctioned by the network. The post was simple, direct, and chilling. We need to tell you what really happened in the Hollow. We need to tell you why we almost quit. We need to tell you what followed us home. Before we go further, subscribe now if you're fascinated by cryptids and the unexplained, because what the Mountain Monsters crew is about to reveal will change everything you thought you knew about what's lurking in Appalachia. The statement began with an apology from John Trapper Tice, the team leader who's been investigating Appalachian monsters for over 40 years. "We've always been honest with y'all about what we encounter out there," Trapper wrote, his usual confidence replaced with something heavier. "But there's one hunt we've never talked about, one creature we tracked that we can't explain, and one night that broke something in all of us." He was referring to March 2019, during what was supposed to be a routine investigation in the hills of southern West Virginia. The team had received reports of livestock mutilations, standard stuff for them. Farmers described finding cattle drained of blood with surgical precision cuts that didn't match any known predator. Worse, witnesses reported seeing something that walked on 2 legs, stood over 7 feet tall, and moved through the forest without making a sound. The crew assumed they were tracking a Grassman variant or possibly a rogue Sasquatch. They'd dealt with dozens of these investigations. This should have been straightforward. "We were wrong," Trapper wrote. "We were so damn wrong." The team, Trapper, Jeff, Willie, Wild Bill, and Huckleberry, arrived at the location on March 23, 2019, just after sunset. Local law enforcement had advised them not to go, which was unusual. Cops in Appalachia are generally supportive of the Ames team, often sharing information and helping with access to remote areas. But the sheriff who met them at the trailhead was different. He was nervous, kept looking over his shoulder at the tree line, and spoke in a low voice, as if afraid something might hear him. "You boys need to understand something," the sheriff told them, according to Wild Bill's account. "This ain't like your other hunts. People don't come back right from that hollow. Some don't come back at all." When Willie asked what he meant by "don't come back right," the sheriff just shook his head and walked away. But before he left, he turned back and said something that none of them forgot. "If you hear it calling your names, don't answer. No matter how much it sounds like someone you know, don't you dare answer." The team laughed it off at the time. They'd heard plenty of local superstitions, but as Jeff wrote in his portion of the statement, "We should have listened. God help us. We should have turned around right then." The first 3 hours of the investigation were normal. They set up thermal cameras, deployed motion sensors, and split into 2 groups to cover more ground. The forest was unusually quiet. No birds, no insects, no ambient wildlife sounds, but that often happened in areas with apex predators. Around 11:47 p.m., Huckleberry's radio crackled with Wild Bill's voice. "We got tracks, fresh ones, you need to see this." The team regrouped at Wild Bill's location, where they found prints unlike anything they'd encountered before. They were roughly humanoid, but wrong. The toes were too long, the heel too narrow, and the depth of the impression suggested something far heavier than a human but distributed differently than a bear or primate. "The prints went deep," Willie explained in his statement. "Real deep. Like whatever made them was carrying enormous weight. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. They were perfectly silent. We found tracks showing this thing had walked within 20 feet of our position, and none of us heard a damn thing. They followed the tracks deeper into the hollow, the terrain becoming steeper and more treacherous. The trees grew denser, blocking out the moonlight. Their flashlight beams seemed to get swallowed by the darkness, not penetrating as far as they should. That's when Jeff heard his name. "Jeff, Jeffrey." It was his mother's voice, crystal clear, coming from deeper in the woods. The same tone she'd used when he was a child, calling him home for dinner. The problem? Jeff's mother had been dead for 3 years. "I froze," Jeff wrote. "Every rational part of my brain knew it wasn't real, knew my mama was gone, but it sounded exactly like her. Same voice, same inflection, same slight accent, and it was calling me home." Trapper grabbed Jeff's arm, stopping him from walking toward the voice. "Don't," Trapper said, remembering the sheriff's warning. But then they all heard it. Different voices, calling different names. Wild Bill heard his late father. Willie heard his ex-wife. Huckleberry heard his childhood best friend who died in a car accident in 1987. And Trapper heard something that made him go pale. He heard his own voice calling to him from the darkness. "It was me," Trapper wrote. "My voice, my words, my cadence, calling out to the team, telling them I'd found the creature, telling them to follow me deeper into the hollow. But I was standing right there. I wasn't the one talking. Something else was using my voice. The team huddled together, backs to each other, flashlights sweeping the tree line. The voices continued, growing more insistent, more desperate. Jeff's mother began pleading with him to come help her. She was hurt. She needed him. Wild Bill's father started getting angry, demanding to know why his son was ignoring him. Then the voices started overlapping, creating a chorus of the dead and the duplicated, all calling from the darkness. That's when Wild Bill's thermal camera picked up something that made him lower the device and stare at the screen in disbelief. There were 7 heat signatures surrounding us, Wild Bill recounted. 7 human-shaped thermal readings, standing just beyond the tree line, completely still. We counted ourselves, 5 people. We were surrounded by something that was warm-blooded, man-sized, and perfectly motionless. Jeff made the decision to use the flare camera to get a better look. He raised it, aimed at the nearest signature, and looked through the viewfinder. What he saw made him drop the camera. It looked like Trapper, Jeff wrote, his words conveying the horror even through text. Standing there in the trees, wearing Trapper's clothes. Same build, same stance. But its head was tilted at an angle that wasn't right, and it was smiling. Not a human smile. Too wide, too many teeth, like something that had studied smiling but didn't understand the emotion behind it. Jeff spun around to confirm Trapper was still with the group. He was, standing right there, very much not smiling. But when Jeff looked back through the FLIR, the Trapper thing was closer. It had moved 15 feet in the 2 seconds Jeff had looked away, and it had done so in complete silence. "Run," Trapper commanded, and the team didn't question him. They ran back the way they came, or tried to. The trail had changed. Landmarks they'd noted on the way in were gone. The path they'd followed was no longer there, replaced by dense undergrowth that looked like it had been undisturbed for decades. Behind them, the voices followed, but now they were changing, distorting. Jeff's mother began speaking in his voice. Wild Bill's father started sounding like Willie. The voices were blending, shifting, learning. "We realized it wasn't trying to lure us separately," Willie explained. "It was learning us. Learning our voices, our patterns, our relationships. It was studying how we communicated so it could replicate us better." The team became disoriented in the darkness, unable to find their way out. Every direction looked the same. Every trail led in circles, and the thermal signatures kept appearing on their cameras, always just at the edge of visibility, always perfectly still until they looked away. Huckleberry, the team's tracker and navigator, made a disturbing discovery. "We kept crossing our own footprints," he wrote. "But some of the prints were facing the wrong direction, like we'd walked the same path backward, or like something else had been walking in our footsteps, matching our stride perfectly." At 2:33 a.m., they stumbled into a small clearing. In the center was a circle of stones arranged in a pattern none of them recognized, and standing around the circle were the figures, all 7 of them. 5 looked like perfect copies of the team members. Same clothing, same equipment, same physical appearance, but something was wrong with their proportions. Their arms hung slightly too long, their necks bent at angles that suggested too many vertebrae. Their eyes reflected the flashlight beams like an animal's, bright and unnatural. The other 2 figures were incomplete. One had Trapper's face, but Wild Bill's body. The other had features that kept shifting, flickering between different team members as if it couldn't decide which one to mimic. "They didn't attack us," Trapper wrote. "They just stood there, watching, breathing in sync with us. When Jeff took a step back, his copy took a step back. When Willie raised his flashlight, his copy raised its arm at the exact same time. They were mirroring us, and I realized with absolute horror that they were waiting to get it right, waiting to perfect their imitation." Wild Bill, always the bravest and most impulsive, shouted at the creatures, "What the hell are you?" The Trapper copy tilted its head further, that too wide smile growing impossibly wider, and spoke in Trapper's exact voice. "We are what remains when you leave. We are what fills the space you occupied. We are the echo that doesn't fade." Then all 7 figures spoke in unison, using all 5 team members' voices simultaneously. "You've been here before. You'll be here again. You never really leave." That's when Huckleberry noticed something that made his blood run cold. Behind the stone circle, in the darkness beyond the clearing, were more figures, dozens of them. Some looked like hikers, wearing clothing from different decades. Some looked like hunters in old-fashioned gear. Some looked like people who'd been lost in these woods long ago, and they were all standing perfectly still, faces blank, eyes reflecting the light, waiting. "The Hollow collects," Trapper wrote. "That's what we understood in that moment. The Hollow collects people, not their bodies, but their patterns, their essence. It creates copies and keeps them there, trapped in a loop of existence, forever walking the same paths, forever calling out to new visitors, forever adding to its collection." The team ran again. this time with pure survival instinct overriding everything else. They crashed through underbrush, fell down slopes, ignored injuries and exhaustion. Behind them, they could hear footsteps, multiple sets of footsteps, matching their pace perfectly. Jeff glanced back once and saw his own face running behind him, keeping pace, mirroring his movements exactly, except for that horrible wrong smile. They burst out of the tree line at 4:17 a.m., nearly 7 hours after they'd entered. Their vehicles were there, untouched, but something was wrong. The sheriff was still there, sitting in his patrol car, watching the woods. "You boys made it out," the sheriff said, but he didn't sound relieved. He sounded disappointed, resigned. "Most don't first time." "First time?" Willie demanded. "What the hell do you mean, first time?" The sheriff looked at each of them carefully, studying their faces, their mannerisms. "Just making sure all of you came back," he said cryptically. "Sometimes something else comes out wearing their faces. You can usually tell by the eyes. The copies never get the eyes quite right." He drove away without another word, leaving the team standing there, looking at each other with sudden suspicion and horror. How would they know if one of them wasn't really them anymore? The aftermath was worse than the encounter itself. "We all started experiencing the same thing," Jeff wrote. "We'd see ourselves, not in mirrors that we could dismiss as stress, but out in the world. I'd be at the grocery store and catch a glimpse of myself in the parking lot, standing perfectly still, watching me from between cars." Wild Bill said he saw himself standing in his backyard at 3 a.m. just staring at his house. Willie's neighbors asked why he was walking around his block at midnight when Willie had been asleep in bed. The team tried to return to normal filming, but the encounters continued. During a hunt in Kentucky 2 months later, Trapper's audio recorder picked up his own voice, whispering things he'd never said. In Tennessee, Huckleberry's motion-activated camera captured footage of Huckleberry walking past the camera, while Huckleberry was asleep in the tent 50 yards away. "We couldn't tell anyone," Trapper explained. "How do you explain to a production company that you might have brought something back, that there might be copies of us out there, getting better at imitating us, learning our lives, studying how to replace us?" The team consulted with experts, not cryptozoologists or paranormal investigators, but psychologists, neurologists, anyone who might explain what they were experiencing. The consensus was stress-induced hallucinations brought on by a shared traumatic experience. But then came the incident that forced them to speak out. 3 weeks ago, Jeff's wife called him in a panic. She'd been at home alone when she heard the front door open. She called out, thinking it was Jeff coming home early. Footsteps walked down the hall. She heard breathing outside the bedroom door. Then Jeff's voice, "Honey, I'm home." But Jeff was at a team meeting 3 hours away. He had witnesses. He was definitely not at home. His wife, terrified, locked herself in the bathroom and called the police. When officers arrived, they found the front door unlocked, muddy footprints leading down the hall to the bedroom door, then stopping. The prints matched Jeff's boots exactly. Same size, same wear pattern, same unique scuff on the left sole, but the prints didn't lead back out. They just stopped, as if whoever or whatever had made them had simply ceased to exist at that spot. "That's when we knew we had to go public," Jeff wrote. "Because whatever came back with us from the hollow, it's not content to just watch anymore. It's getting closer. It's learning our homes, our families, our lives, and we don't know how to stop it." The crew's statement ended with a warning and a plea. "If you're planning to go into the Appalachian wilderness, especially the areas we've investigated, please reconsider," Trapper wrote. "And if you go anyway, follow these rules. Never go alone. Never answer if you hear your name called. Never follow voices that sound familiar. If you see someone you know standing too still or smiling wrong, turn around immediately. And most importantly, if you encounter something that looks exactly like someone in your group, make sure you can account for where that person actually is before you approach it." The statement concluded with something that sent chills through every fan who read it. "We've decided to continue hunting because something needs to document these creatures and warn people. But we're also continuing because we have to. Because whatever is in the hollow has part of us now. It knows us, it can find us, and the only way we stay ahead of it is by staying together, by staying alert, and by never ever going back to that place. We just hope we all stay us." Within minutes of the statement being posted, the comments exploded. Hundreds of people reported similar experiences in Appalachia. Hikers who'd seen their own doppelgangers on trails, campers who'd heard their voices calling from the woods when they were safely in their tents, hunters who'd encountered something that looked like their partner but moved wrong, spoke wrong, smiled wrong. One comment stood out, posted by a user with no profile picture and an account created minutes before. "The Hollow thanks you for the introduction. Your faces have been very useful. We're getting better at wearing them." The comment was deleted within seconds, but not before dozens of people screenshot it. The account vanished entirely, as if it had never existed. And then, This morning, something else happened. A hiker in West Virginia posted a trail camera photo to social media. The camera had been set up to capture wildlife near a remote trail. In the photo, standing in a perfect line on the trail, were 5 figures. They were too far away to make out clearly, but their silhouettes matched the Mountain Monsters team exactly. Same heights, same builds, same postures. But according to the timestamp, the photo was taken yesterday, and according to the team's social media, they were all at a convention in Pennsylvania yesterday, 300 miles away. One commenter enhanced the image, zooming in on the figures' faces. The resolution was poor, pixelated, but you could make out enough detail to see one thing clearly. All 5 figures were smiling, the same too wide smile, the same wrong expression, and they were looking directly at the camera as if they knew it was there, as if they wanted to be seen, as if they were ready. The Mountain Monsters crew has broken their silence, but in doing so, they may have revealed something worse. Whatever is in the hollow isn't content to stay there. It's patient, it's learning, it's waiting for the right moment to step out of the forest and into the lives of the people it's been studying. And the question that haunts everyone who's read their statement is simple but terrifying. How many of the people walking around are actually people? How many are copies, echoes, things that learned to wear human faces and are now living human lives, while the originals are still trapped somewhere in the darkness, calling out names that will never be answered? The crew wanted to break their silence. They wanted to warn people, but in revealing what happened in the hollow, they may have also revealed that it's already too late, that whatever followed them out is already here, already among us, already perfecting its disguise. And maybe, just maybe, the crew members who posted that statement aren't the real ones anymore. Maybe the real Trapper, Jeff, Willie, Wild Bill, and Huckleberry are still in the hollow, still trapped, still watching their copies live their lives. How would we even know? If this story disturbed you, subscribe and share this video. Let us know in the comments if you've ever encountered your own doppelganger or heard your voice calling from somewhere you weren't. And if you ever go hiking in Appalachia, remember the crew's warning. Some things in those mountains don't just watch, they learn, they copy, they wait, and sometimes they come home with you. The Mountain Monsters crew broke their silence, but maybe silence would have been safer, because now, whatever is out there knows we're talking about it. And if there's one thing that's become clear from their statement, it's this. The things in the hollow don't like being ignored, but they love being acknowledged. And we just gave them all the acknowledgement they needed. According to Jacob Buck Lowe, what happened behind the cameras was never meant to be part of a TV show. Footage disappeared, investigations were quietly shut down, and certain locations were never spoken about again. Buck was known as the fearless rookie, the one willing to push forward when others hesitated. But as the seasons went on, viewers noticed something change. The jokes faded, the fear stopped looking playful, and the show itself began to feel heavier. Now, Buck has finally hinted at why. This isn't about monsters or myths, it's about patterns, erased evidence, and warnings that came from places no one expected. What he claims forces a disturbing question. Was Mountain Monsters documenting folklore or stumbling into something real that couldn't be controlled? Before we go any further, subscribe, because once you hear what Buck says really happened, you'll understand why some stories never get a proper ending. Before audiences ever knew him as the wide-eyed rookie willing to charge into the woods, Jacob Buck Lowe was something very different off camera. He wasn't raised on campfire stories meant to scare tourists. He grew up inside the Appalachian foothills where folklore wasn't entertainment, it was local memory. These were stories passed quietly, often with warnings attached. Places you didn't linger, ridges you didn't cross after dark, hollers where search parties went in and never found what they were looking for. Buck absorbed those stories early, but what separated him from others wasn't fear, it was curiosity. He didn't obsess over creatures. He obsessed over why the same locations kept producing the same kinds of stories across decades. As a teenager, he spent hours digging through county records, old newspapers, and handwritten church logs, looking for disappearances and accidents that never quite lined up with official explanations. Long before television, he was already mapping patterns. When Mountain Monsters began filming, Buck joined the team as the youngest and least experienced member. On screen, he was framed as comic relief, eager, fearless, sometimes reckless. It worked. Audiences loved him. But behind the scenes, Buck was doing something very different. While others focused on traps and theories, he started quietly cross-referencing filming locations with historical incidents, missing persons, mine collapses, restricted land purchases that didn't make sense for rural Appalachia. Producers initially dismissed it as overthinking. After all, the show wasn't meant to be an investigation. It was entertainment. But Buck didn't see it that way. To him, the cameras were just tools. The real question was why certain areas reacted the same way every time the team showed up. Equipment failures, sudden silence in the woods, locals refusing to speak once specific ridgelines were mentioned. By the second season, Buck had started keeping a private notebook. Not episode notes, not creature sketches, coordinates, dates, weather shifts, audio anomalies. He never talked about it on camera. When asked, he'd shrug it off with a joke. But crew members later admitted Buck was often the first to go quiet when something felt off, and the last to leave a location once filming stopped. What viewers didn't realize was that Buck wasn't trying to prove monsters were real. He was trying to understand why some places didn't behave like the rest of the world, and that mindset would eventually put him on a collision course with something far bigger than a television show. As mountain monsters gained popularity, the structure of the show stayed the same, but the atmosphere didn't. By the third and fourth seasons, something subtle had shifted, and Jacob Buck Lowe was one of the first to feel it. What once felt like stage tension began turning into genuine unease. The woods no longer reacted like a backdrop. They felt alert, as if the environment itself was aware of the crew's presence. On camera, the jokes still landed. The shouting, the running, the exaggerated reactions were all there. But between takes, Buck noticed patterns that couldn't be edited away. Equipment failures weren't random anymore. Cameras would shut down only in certain zones. Batteries drained within minutes in areas locals had warned them not to enter. Audio interference spiked at the same elevations, no matter which county they filmed in. To Buck, that consistency mattered. While the rest of the team focused on the hunt narrative, Buck started quietly comparing locations. He realized many of the most active sites shared strange similarities. Old mining corridors, abandoned rail lines, unexplained land acquisitions, and stretches of forest that appeared on maps but were rarely maintained. In some cases, official property records were incomplete or oddly redacted. That didn't happen by accident. Locals began acting differently too. Early seasons featured people eager to talk. Later shoots were met with silence. Doors closed. Conversations stopped the moment cameras appeared. In one instance, a landowner agreed to be interviewed, then backed out after a brief phone call Buck overheard him take. When asked why, the man simply said, "Y'all don't need to be here," and walked away. Buck started sleeping less. Crew members noticed him pacing at night, listening instead of talking. During one hunt, he refused to step into a clearing despite cameras rolling, quietly telling the others, "This isn't where we're supposed to be standing." That moment never aired. Producers said it slowed the episode. What disturbed Buck most was how often the fear felt anticipatory, not reactive. Sounds happened before movement. Silence fell before activity. It felt less like they were chasing something, and more like something was deciding whether to engage. When Buck raised these concerns privately, he was told not to overthink it. The show had a tone to maintain. But by then, Buck understood something critical. If this were just folklore, randomness would rule. Instead, the patterns were tightening, and when patterns tighten, it usually means something is being controlled. That realization marked the moment Buck stopped seeing mountain monsters as a show and started seeing it as a record of places people weren't meant to document. The breaking point came during an investigation that never made it to television. Internally, it was treated like any other case. A new location, local reports, and a build-up toward a nighttime hunt. But from the moment the crew arrived, Jacob Buck Lowe knew this one was different. The area felt restricted in a way that had nothing to do with posted signs or property lines. There were no warnings, yet everything about the place suggested they weren't supposed to be there. The first red flag was the absence of locals. In past investigations, someone always lingered nearby. Curious onlookers, landowners, or neighbors watching from a distance. This time, the surrounding area was empty. No houses with lights on, no distant vehicles, just silence that felt deliberate. Buck later said it reminded him of land that had been quietly cleared, not abandoned. During setup, equipment issues began immediately. Thermal cameras showed movement with no heat source attached. Motion sensors triggered without recording anything. Audio picked up low-frequency interference that engineers couldn't trace. These weren't failures, the devices were functioning, just not in ways that made sense. Buck started documenting everything in a personal notebook, noting timestamps and locations the production logs ignored. The moment that changed everything happened after midnight. While reviewing live feeds, Buck noticed a humanoid shape on thermal, upright, still, and facing the crew. It didn't move like an animal. It didn't flee. It simply stood there, as if waiting. When Buck called it out, multiple cameras cut at once. The feeds went dark for nearly 2 minutes. When systems rebooted, the footage was gone. Producers initially blamed corruption, but Buck overheard an editor later say something that didn't sit right. There was a second copy. That copy, Buck was told, had been flagged and removed before the team even returned home. No explanation followed. The episode outline was rewritten within days. What should have been the central encounter was replaced with vague sounds, jump cuts, and a false alarm conclusion. Buck knew editing tricks. He could spot continuity errors instantly. Weather didn't match. Dialogue was missing. Reaction shots were reused out of sequence. The story had been altered to erase something specific. When Buck pushed back, he was told the same thing repeatedly. It doesn't fit the tone. But tone wasn't the issue. Control was. That unaired investigation marked the first time Buck realized decisions were being made above the production level. Someone outside the show had weighed in, and whatever they saw in that footage, they didn't want it explained or remembered. After the unaired investigation, things didn't return to normal. They tightened. Schedules became vague. Locations were changed without explanation. Certain areas Buck had flagged for follow-up were quietly removed from future plans. And then came the warning. It happened days before the next scheduled shoot. Jacob Buck Lowe received a call from an unlisted number. No caller ID, no voicemail afterward. The voice on the other end was calm, controlled, and unnervingly specific. The man addressed Buck by full name and referenced a location the crew hadn't announced publicly yet. Then he said something Buck would never forget. "You've already documented what you weren't supposed to. Don't push it further." The call ended without a threat, without emotion. That's what disturbed Buck the most. It wasn't intimidation, it was instruction. Buck tried to brush it off as a prank until he checked his phone records. The call didn't exist. No entry, no routing data. When he contacted his carrier, they claimed a temporary system error had occurred. The next day, even that explanation disappeared. The record was gone. He told a producer who dismissed it as coincidence. He told another crew member who joked about fans going too far. But when Buck finally told Trapper, the reaction was different. Trapper didn't laugh. He didn't question it. He simply went quiet before saying, "That means you're getting close." From that point on, Buck became hyper-aware of small details. Vehicles parked too long near their base camp. Drones that appeared briefly overhead before vanishing. Sudden radio interference whenever certain topics came up on set. None of it was dramatic enough to prove, but together it formed a pattern. During one filmed hunt, Buck broke character and spoke directly into the camera, saying, "If someone's watching this, maybe you should tell us why." That line never aired. Editors later claimed it disrupted the pacing. Buck knew better. It disrupted something else. Soon after, new non-disclosure agreements were issued. They were longer, stricter, and unusually broad. Language about unaired material, field anomalies, and external review appeared where it never had before. Buck realized the show wasn't just being produced anymore. It was being monitored, and whatever had been captured during that lost investigation hadn't scared the network. It had alerted someone else entirely. By the time Jacob Buck Lowe realized something was seriously wrong, it was already too late to stop it. The footage from the unaired investigation, the night everything shifted, had entered a phase Buck would later describe as disappearing while we were still standing there. In post-production, Buck requested to review the raw files himself. This wasn't unusual. Cast members had always been allowed to sit in on early cuts, especially when something significant happened in the field. But this time, the response was different. He was told the files were being stabilized. Then he was told they were temporarily locked for review. Then, finally, he was told something that made his stomach drop. The files were no longer accessible to the editing team at all. A longtime editor pulled Buck aside off the record and told him the truth in a whisper. A duplicate of the raw footage had been pulled directly from the server and encrypted, not by the network's usual post-production staff, but by an external party that logged in remotely. The file tag wasn't labeled by episode or date. It was marked restricted material. Within days, the episode outline was rewritten. Scenes were reordered. Dialogue no longer matched the environment. Night shots suddenly cut to daytime audio. What had been a central encounter was replaced with a vague false alarm narrative. Viewers later noticed it immediately. The episode felt wrong, incomplete, like it had been hollowed out. Buck confronted production about it. He wasn't angry yet, just confused. He asked a simple question. Why are we pretending nothing happened? The response wasn't an answer. It was a warning. He was told continuing to push could jeopardize the show's future and his role in it. That was when Buck understood the stakes. This wasn't about entertainment quality or continuity errors. This was about removal, not editing. erasing. Soon after, a second editor quit abruptly. No explanation. His name vanished from the credits on the following episodes. Another staffer told Buck she'd been instructed never to discuss that investigation again, even internally. The phrase used was chillingly specific. It's not part of the record. Then came the final confirmation. Buck attempted to access his own personal backup drive, footage he'd copied in the field as a precaution. The drive powered on, spun, and then failed completely. A data specialist later told him the corruption pattern was unusual, resembling a targeted overwrite rather than random damage. By the end of that month, the footage was gone, not lost, not misplaced, removed. And the most disturbing part wasn't that the network allowed it to happen. It was that they seemed relieved when it was finally gone. After the footage vanished, Jacob Buck Lowe noticed something that unsettled him more than the lost files ever could. The energy on set changed, not dramatically, quietly, like a room where a conversation stops the moment someone walks in. Production meetings became closed door. Decisions that used to involve the whole Ames team were suddenly handled by people Buck didn't recognize. New faces appeared with vague titles: compliance, review, liaison. They didn't joke. They didn't watch monitors for entertainment. They watched people. Buck started feeling like the hunts were no longer being designed for discovery, but for control. Locations were restricted. Certain topics were discouraged before filming even began. When Buck asked why a promising site had been pulled from the schedule, he was told only that it raised concerns. Concerns for who? No one would say. The clearest sign came during a shoot, when Buck requested a copy of raw thermal drone footage. He'd seen something move through the tree line that didn't behave like any animal he knew. Tall, upright, too fast. The drone operator told him the feed had glitched. When Buck asked for the backup, he was informed it had already been reformatted. That had never happened before. Soon after, the team received updated filming guidelines. Buried deep in the language was a new restriction. Content involving non-verifiable biological entities was no longer approved for broadcast. The phrasing wasn't scientific. It wasn't legal. It felt governmental. Buck realized then that Mountain Monsters wasn't just being edited, it was being filtered. Even on camera, things felt different. Conversations were cut mid-thought. Equipment malfunctions Buck knew weren't natural were reframed as jokes. Moments of genuine fear were smoothed over in post-production. The show still looked the same to viewers, but to Buck, it felt staged in reverse. Reality being bent to fit a safer narrative. Behind the scenes, paranoia crept in. Buck noticed his phone behaving strangely, contacts disappearing, battery draining without explanation. Once he found his email inbox wiped clean of months of correspondence related to production. The network blamed a sync error. Buck didn't. He began writing everything down. Dates, names, incidents. He stopped trusting digital storage. If something happened, he wanted a record that couldn't be remotely altered. He also stopped talking freely on set, not because he was scared of the monsters, but because he no longer knew who might be listening. The final straw came when a producer told him, almost kindly, "You need to decide whether you want to keep making television or keep asking questions." That's when Buck understood the truth. Mountain Monsters hadn't uncovered something dangerous in the woods. It had crossed a line where someone else decided the story needed to stop being told. By the time the pressure peaked, Jacob Buck Lowe knew he was alone in his concern. Not because the others didn't sense something was wrong, but because they were choosing silence. New NDAs made speaking risky. Careers were on the line. Families were mentioned in meetings more than locations. Buck didn't blame them, but he couldn't do the same. He began asking questions anyway, quiet ones, off camera. He reached out to a former production assistant who admitted an outside group had accessed the show's servers. Not network, not legal, federal. The word wasn't explained. It didn't need to be. Another contact showed Buck a fragment of a server log listing Mountain Monsters alongside other media suppression cases. The label didn't reference folklore or entertainment. It referenced containment. That was the moment Buck stopped believing this was about ratings, liability, or image. It was about control. Soon after, he was warned again, this time indirectly. A producer told him certain conversations were being flagged. Another suggested he take time off. Buck refused. He'd come to a conclusion he couldn't walk back from. If the show stayed quiet, the truth disappeared. And Buck wasn't willing to let that happen, no matter what it cost him. After Buck refused to back down, the consequences came quietly. His screen time shrank. Meetings happened without him. Archived footage he requested was suddenly unavailable, then outright denied. When he hinted online that material had been removed, the posts vanished within hours, and his account was briefly locked for abnormal activity. No explanation followed. Soon after, Buck stepped away. Officially, it was personal time. In reality, the door had closed. Years later, Buck rarely speaks about Mountain Monsters. When he does, he avoids details. No creatures, no locations. He talks about patterns. about how fast truth disappears when it makes the wrong people uncomfortable. Fragments still surface now and then, a clipped frame, a mismatched line, a screenshot, only to be erased just as quickly, but the memory lingers. Buck once said, "The scariest thing we found wasn't in the woods. It was how easily everyone agreed to pretend it wasn't real." The show didn't end with a finale. It ended with silence, and somewhere between the missing footage and the edits that followed, Buck learned the truth. Some monsters don't chase you, they erase you. According to Jacob Buck Lowe, what happened behind the cameras was never meant to be part of a TV show. Footage disappeared, investigations were quietly shut down, and certain locations were never spoken about again. Buck was known as the fearless rookie, the one willing to push forward when others hesitated. But as the seasons went on, viewers noticed something change. The jokes faded, the fear stopped looking playful, and the show itself began to feel heavier. Now, Buck has finally hinted at why. This isn't about monsters or myths. It's about patterns, erased evidence, and warnings that came from places no one expected. What he claims forces a disturbing question. Was Mountain Monsters documenting folklore, or stumbling into something real that couldn't be controlled? Before we go any further, subscribe, because once you hear what Buck says really happened, you'll understand why some stories never get a proper ending. Jacob Buck Lowe was the youngest hunter on Mountain Monsters, the fan favorite who learned everything from the legendary Trapper. But when the cameras stopped rolling and Trapper died, Buck's life took a turn nobody saw coming. What happened next reveals the dark reality of what happens to reality TV stars after the fame disappears. Tonight, we're uncovering the truth about Buck's life after Mountain Monsters, and it's not what you think. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. In 2013, a young hunter from the heart of West Virginia stepped into the spotlight and changed the face of cryptid hunting on television forever. Jacob Buck Lowe joined the cast of Mountain Monsters as one of the original AIMS team members and immediately stood out for one crucial reason. He was the youngest member of the crew by a significant margin, while the rest of the team consisted of grizzled, weathered Appalachian veterans who had spent decades tracking through those ancient mountains. Buck brought youthful energy, raw enthusiasm, and a hunger to prove himself that viewers found instantly compelling. His personality created a perfect contrast with the older hunters. Where they were cautious and methodical, Buck was impulsive and eager. Where they relied on decades of experience, Buck relied on instinct and adrenaline, and fans absolutely loved him for it. He became the relatable entry point for younger audiences, the guy who asked the questions viewers were thinking, who reacted with genuine excitement when something unexplainable happened in the darkness. But behind the scenes, the reality of filming Mountain Monsters was far more grueling than most viewers ever realized. The shooting schedule was absolutely brutal, with the team often spending entire nights in freezing temperatures, hiking through treacherous terrain, setting elaborate traps, and staging dramatic confrontations with creatures that may or may not have actually been there. Like many reality shows, there was constant pressure to deliver compelling television, to create moments that would keep audiences coming back week after week. For Buck, being the youngest meant working twice as hard to earn respect, to prove he belonged among these legendary hunters, to show he wasn't just the kid who got lucky with a TV contract. The physical toll, the mental exhaustion, the strange liminal space between reality and performance that defines all reality television. Buck was living it all while still in his 20s, and the cracks were already beginning to form beneath the surface, even if nobody could see them yet. One of the most compelling dynamics on Mountain Monsters was the relationship between Buck and the team's legendary leader, John Trapper Tice. For many fans watching at home, Buck felt like the spiritual son of Trapper on screen, the younger hunter learning directly from an old-school Appalachian legend who had spent his entire life in those mountains. Trapper wasn't just the team leader. He was a father figure, a mentor, a living embodiment of Appalachian hunting culture and folklore traditions passed down through generations. And Buck absorbed everything Trapper had to teach. The way he tracked, the way he read signs in the forest, the way he approached the unknown with respect rather than just bravado. Their on-screen chemistry became one of the show's most powerful elements. Trapper would bark orders and Buck would execute them without hesitation. Trapper would share wisdom about the mountains and Buck would listen with genuine reverence. It created a narrative arc that felt authentic, even within the sometimes questionable reality TV framework. Viewers watched Buck grow from an eager young hunter into a more seasoned tracker under Trapper's guidance. But it's crucial to clarify something that has caused confusion among fans over the years. Trapper and Buck were not related by blood. They were not father and son in any biological sense. Their relationship relationship was purely professional and mentorship-based, forged through years of working together in extremely challenging conditions. However, the bond they developed was clearly deep and meaningful, transcending typical co-worker relationships. For Buck, Trapper represented everything he aspired to become as a hunter and as a man. The respect was visible in every interaction, every conversation, every moment they shared on screen. And when Trapper's health began to decline in later seasons, that bond would be tested in ways that neither of them could have anticipated. The foundation of Buck's entire experience on Mountain Monsters was built on Trapper's leadership, and when that foundation began to crumble, everything else would start falling apart as well. As Mountain Monsters progressed through its later seasons, viewers began noticing something troubling. Trapper's appearances became less frequent, his energy noticeably diminished, his usual commanding presence fading gradually. Behind the scenes, the truth was becoming unavoidable. Trapper was dealing with serious health issues that were progressively limiting his ability to participate in the grueling filming schedule. The show tried to work around his declining condition, giving him less physically demanding roles, allowing him more rest between shoots, but the reality was clear to everyone involved. The man who had been the heart and soul of AIMS was slowly slipping away. Then in December 2019, the news that everyone had been dreading finally came. John Trapper Tice passed away, leaving an enormous void in the show, in the team, and in the hearts of fans who had followed his adventures for years. The announcement devastated the Mountain Monsters community. Tributes poured in from around the world. Fellow cast members shared emotional statements about losing their friend, their leader, their brother in the woods. But for Buck specifically, losing Trapper hit differently. While we can only speculate about the depth of his personal grief, it seems almost certain that this wasn't just a TV moment for him. This was the loss of a mentor who had shaped his entire adult life, who had taught him not just how to hunt, but how to carry himself as an Appalachian man. For Buck, who had spent years in those dark woods by Trapper's side, learning his methods, absorbing his wisdom, building a relationship that went far beyond scripted television, that loss was almost certainly deeply personal and profoundly painful. Grief has a way of amplifying every other struggle in a person's life, and for someone already navigating the unstable world of reality television, the death of Trapper likely represented more than just losing a colleague. It meant losing the anchor that had kept everything together, the steady presence that had made all the chaos and uncertainty worthwhile. Mountain Monsters ran for 8 seasons, building a dedicated cult following of cryptid enthusiasts, Appalachian culture fans, and people who simply enjoyed watching a group of colorful characters hunt impossible creatures through dark forests. But like many reality shows, it ended somewhat abruptly in 2020, leaving viewers with unresolved cliffhangers and unanswered questions about the team's ultimate fate. For the cast members, the sudden ending meant facing an uncertain future. The regular paychecks stopped. The visibility disappeared. The structure that had defined their lives for years simply vanished overnight. But Buck wasn't ready to let the legacy die. In late 2024 and into 2025, something unexpected happened. Buck, along with fellow AIMS members Huckleberry and Wild Bill, launched a new project that represented both a continuation and a reinvention. They created Sons of Appalachia, a YouTube-based series that would continue the cryptid hunting tradition while explicitly honoring Trapper's memory and the methods he had taught them. This wasn't a major network production with significant budgets and guaranteed viewership. This was 3 hunters with cameras, trying to keep the dream alive through sheer determination and passion for what they did. Sons of Appalachia represented a very different kind of challenge. Instead of fighting creatures in the woods, they were now fighting algorithms, competing for attention in an oversaturated digital landscape, trying to build an audience one video at a time. The production values were lower, the resources were limited, but the authenticity was arguably higher than it had ever been on cable television. For Buck, this new chapter meant taking control of his own narrative, steering his own career, and ensuring that everything Trapper had taught him wouldn't be forgotten. It was both inspiring and somewhat tragic. Here was a man who had achieved legitimate television fame, now reduced to scraping for views on YouTube just to continue doing what he loved. The transition from cable star to digital creator is a journey many have taken, but few talk about how difficult and humbling that fall can actually be. For many reality TV hunters in Appalachia, life after the cameras stop rolling can turn dark incredibly fast. This is a pattern we've seen repeated across countless shows and countless lives. Brief fame that feels enormous in the moment. Small paychecks that seem significant until they stop coming. No residuals, no royalties, no financial safety net for when the show ends. And then reality hits with brutal force. Bills that don't care about your television credits. Health issues that don't wait for your next opportunity. Mental health struggles that intensify in the silence after years of constant production chaos. And absolutely no support system from the networks that profited from your labor and your image. The entertainment industry has a long, documented history of chewing up working-class participants and spitting them out once their usefulness expires. This is especially true in reality television, where participants often lack the contracts, protections, and representation that scripted actors receive. They're not considered talent in the traditional sense. They're considered content, raw material to be extracted and exploited until the audience loses interest. For someone like Buck, coming from a small Appalachian community where opportunities are already limited, the whiplash of sudden fame followed by sudden obscurity can be psychologically devastating. We've seen this pattern over and over. The reality star who ends up broke, addicted, homeless, forgotten. The person who was on television one year and in a county jail the next. The familiar face who quietly disappears and nobody thinks to ask what happened to them. There is absolutely no public record that Jacob Lowe has gone through arrests, overdoses, or homelessness. But if he had, it would fit a well-known and well-documented pattern for reality TV's forgotten stars, particularly those from economically disadvantaged regions who were never given the tools or support to navigate sudden visibility and its inevitable disappearance. What we actually know about Jacob Buck Lowe's personal life is relatively limited, which is probably exactly how he prefers it. The documented facts paint a picture of a man deeply rooted in his Appalachian heritage. He's originally from West Virginia, born and raised in the mountains that would later become his television hunting grounds. His background before Mountain Monsters involved hunting and fishing, traditional Appalachian outdoor skills passed down through generations of mountain families. These weren't hobbies for Buck. They were survival skills, cultural practices, a way of life that connected him to the land and to his ancestors. In 2018, during the height of Mountain Monsters' popularity, Buck married Christine Stein, marking a significant personal milestone amid the chaos of reality television production. Marriage itself is challenging under normal circumstances, but balancing a marriage with the demands of a public persona and dangerous night shoots in the woods creates pressures that most couples never have to face. The constant travel, the physical danger, the strange schedule, the public scrutiny, the financial uncertainty. These are stressors that can destroy even the strongest relationships. Beyond these basic biographical facts, Buck has maintained relative privacy about his personal life, which makes sense given the invasive nature of reality television. He's not active on social media in the way many reality stars are, constantly sharing personal details and private moments. He's kept his family life, his struggles, his triumphs largely away from public view, and that restraint deserves respect. What we can say with certainty is that Buck represents a particular type of Appalachian man: tough, resourceful, connected to tradition, suspicious of outsiders, fiercely loyal to his community. These qualities made him compelling television, but they also make him someone who likely struggles with the performative aspects of modern fame. The constant need to share, to engage, to commodify every aspect of your life for public consumption. For someone raised in mountain culture where privacy and self-reliance are deeply valued, the demands of reality television and digital content creation probably feel fundamentally unnatural and exhausting. Here's where we need to be absolutely clear and honest about the limits of what can be verified about Buck's life. There is no verified public information that Jacob Buck Lowe spiraled into addiction after Mountain Monsters ended. There are no credible reports that he lived in his truck, homeless and desperate. There are no documented stays in recovery housing or rehabilitation facilities. These narrative elements, while they fit common patterns for reality television participants, are not confirmed aspects of Buck's actual life story and should not be presented or accepted as biographical fact. This distinction matters enormously. It's easy to construct a tragic narrative that feels plausible, that aligns with what we know happens to many people in similar circumstances, that creates compelling content. But plausibility is not the same as truth, and patterns are not the same as individual experience. Buck deserves to have his actual story told, not a fictionalized version that serves a predetermined narrative arc. What is absolutely real, however, is the environment Buck exists within. Appalachia's devastating opioid crisis is well documented and has destroyed countless lives across the region. The economic stress facing working-class communities throughout West Virginia and surrounding states is severe and worsening. The way reality television fame can magnify every existing crack in a person's life, turning manageable problems into catastrophic failures, is proven across countless examples. So while we don't know Buck's specific struggles, we know the context he's operating within is brutal. We know the pressures he's facing are real. We know that even if he's avoided the worst outcomes, he's almost certainly fought battles that the public will never see or understand. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Buck's relative privacy might indicate he's handling everything well, or it might indicate he's struggling privately. We simply don't know, and we shouldn't pretend we do. So what actually happened to Jacob Buck Lowe after Mountain Monsters? The documented facts tell a story that's less sensational, but perhaps more genuinely interesting than manufactured tragedy. Buck remained a main cast member through all 8 seasons of the show, never getting fired, never quitting, never disappearing mysteriously. He was there from the beginning in 2013 until the show's conclusion in 2020, a 7-year run that represents genuine consistency and professional commitment in the notoriously unstable world of reality television. Then, after a period of relative quiet following the show's cancellation, Buck resurfaced publicly as one of the 3 core members of Sons of Appalachia. Alongside Huckleberry and Wild Bill, he's now leading a new cryptid hunting series that launched in 2025, explicitly designed to continue Trapper's legacy and keep Appalachian monster hunting traditions alive for a new generation of viewers. In one sense, what happened to Buck is tragic, but in a different way than typical reality TV horror stories. This is the tragedy of diminishment rather than destruction. A beloved cable television star, someone who appeared in millions of homes, who had genuine fame and recognition, now reduced to fighting YouTube algorithms just to stay visible, trading network production budgets for whatever equipment they can afford, building audiences one subscriber at a time instead of inheriting established viewership. This is the reality for most television personalities once their show ends. The industry moves on instantly, viewers forget quickly, and yesterday's star becomes today's struggling content creator, desperately trying to remain relevant in an attention economy that has already moved past them. But there's also something admirable and resilient in Buck's journey. He didn't give up. He didn't fade away quietly. He didn't let Trapper's death or the show's cancellation end his connection to the work he clearly loves. He adapted, evolved, and found a new path forward, even if that path is harder and less glamorous than what came before. We don't know every detail of Jacob Buck Lowe's private life, and we shouldn't pretend we do. Speculation presented as fact helps no one and disrespects the actual human being behind the television character. But his journey from small-town hunter to cable TV star and then to YouTube survivor sits on top of a much bigger, darker story about what reality television does to people once the cameras go dark. The real monsters aren't cryptids hiding in Appalachian forests. The real monsters are systemic, addiction that preys on economically devastated communities, grief that compounds when you lose mentors and father figures, guilt over not living up to expectations, not capitalizing on opportunities, not becoming what everyone said you could be. The entertainment industry's exploitation of working-class people for profit without providing long-term support. Buck's story, whatever its specific details, represents thousands of similar stories. Reality TV participants used and discarded. Appalachian communities strip-mined for content the same way they've been strip-mined for coal. People whose humanity gets reduced to narrative arcs and clickable content. If there's a lesson here, it's about maintaining skepticism toward the reality television industry's promises and practices. It's about recognizing that every person we see on screen is a complete human being with struggles we'll never fully understand. It's about demanding better treatment and support for the people who create the content we consume. And it's about remembering that when we ask what happened to someone, we're asking about a real life, not just a story.